Someone once tried to prove they weren't responsible for a disaster by explaining they were emotionally elsewhere during the event. And somehow, that wasn't even the dumbest part. Buckle up. The real masterpieces of human self-inflicted chaos are still ahead. 1. A man once tried to explain why his car was found halfway inside a grocery store freezer aisle by calmly informing police that his GPS got emotional and needed space, which is a sentence that should immediately revoke someone's driver's license on poetic grounds alone. But he continued by insisting that he trusted technology the way normal people trust brakes. And the worst part was the absolute confidence with which he pointed at the shattered automatic doors and said, "See, it clearly wanted me to cool off." This is a person who looked at several yards of destroyed property, a panicked night manager, and a sedan resting between frozen peas and microwave burritos, and decided the smartest angle was to shift responsibility onto a satellite system orbiting the planet. No remorse, no shame, just a man and his unwavering loyalty to the world's least supportive navigation app. 2. A teenager once attempted to explain why their school's fire alarm had been pulled during final exams by claiming they were testing the emergency preparedness of the educational environment, which is a very long way of saying I panicked and slapped the loudest object on the wall. As administrators gathered around the alarm panel like archaeologists inspecting a cursed vase, this teen, fully committed to the role of disaster consultant, insisted they were providing a valuable real-world assessment and that any emotional distress suffered by fellow students was simply data. Somewhere in this performance, they even dropped the phrase institutional resilience metrics, which is exactly what happens when a human being runs out of excuses but still wants to sound like a TED Talk instead of someone who just didn't study for chemistry. It was a symphony of academic jargon masking the simple truth. Someone desperately wanted out of a test and chose chaos over flashcards. 3. A guy once tried to explain why he'd glued his hand to a restaurant table by saying the adhesive looked lonely, a claim so conceptually broken it belongs in a museum under the category Humanity Exhibit A. The staff approached him like bomb technicians approaching a suspicious package, and there he sat, stuck to the table like a failed magic trick that even the magician wants to leave. When asked why there was industrial-strength glue in his pocket at a family restaurant, he doubled down and claimed he carries it for emergencies, as though real emergencies involve needing to secure furniture at a moment's notice. Meanwhile, the table was slowly beginning to peel off the floor, making him look like a low-budget Marvel origin story gone wrong. Every sentence he added only deepened the chasm between reality and whatever alternate universe he was operating in. Eventually, the manager had to call maintenance not to fix the table, but to detach the world's first adhesive philosopher. 4. Someone once attempted to explain why they were found standing on top of a copy machine in an office bathroom at 7 a.m. by boldly asserting that they were conducting structural integrity tests, a phrase guaranteed to raise blood pressure in anyone who works in facilities management. The copy machine, of course, disagreed, having partially collapsed under their weight like a folding chair at a family reunion. When their supervisor asked why the test needed to be performed in near darkness before business hours, they insisted they were preventing bias in the results, which is impressively scientific for a person who clearly thought office equipment was a jungle gym. At one point, they even gestured at the shattered scanner glass and said, "This shows potential weaknesses," as if they hadn't personally created those weaknesses with their entire body. Nothing says corporate excellence like someone turning a sensitive machine into a climbing wall and then pretending it's all part of a long-term research initiative. 5. A woman trying to explain why she'd driven her car straight into a neighbor's koi pond insisted that the fish looked judgmental, which is one of those statements that reveals more psychology than anyone asked for. The koi pond, previously a serene showcase of suburban tranquility, now looked like Poseidon's junkyard as her bumper bobbed among confused fish. When confronted, she leaned into the narrative with astonishing commitment, describing the koi as emotionally hostile and claiming they challenged her authority when she walked by earlier that morning. Her neighbor, holding a broken garden statue like it was a wounded comrade, attempted to ask reasonable questions about brakes, steering, and the entire concept of driveways, but she instead launched into a monologue about aquatic energy fields. This wasn't an accident. It was a turf war with fish that never signed up to be antagonists. The koi, meanwhile, floated around her headlights, wondering how they became extras in someone's battle with imaginary aquatic supremacy. 6. An employee once explained why an entire pallet of merchandise was shrink-wrapped around themselves by stating they were demonstrating the vulnerabilities of traditional packaging systems. Which sounds impressive until you remember they were wrapped head to toe like a deeply confused caterpillar in a warehouse. Co-workers found them tipping gently from side to side, encased in industrial plastic, like a frozen food display with opinions. When asked how they ended up like this, they blamed the pallet jack for initiating the engagement, which is a bold accusation against an inanimate object whose entire personality is moves boxes. They then attempted to roll toward management to make their case, which only made everything worse, as nothing undermines one's credibility more than wobbling across the floor like a trapped Roomba. The explanation grew more philosophical as they insisted the experience was educational, though the only thing being educated was everyone else's sense of secondhand embarrassment. 7. A man caught cooking a steak on an active hotel iron explained, with absolute sincerity, that he was pioneering portable culinary solutions, as though Gordon Ramsay were about to burst through the door and knight him for innovation. The housekeeping staff stared at the scene: a scorched pillowcase, a smoking iron, and a man who had clearly seen one too many camping hacks online. When told he could have simply used the hotel restaurant, he argued that true chefs work with limitations, conveniently forgetting that limitations usually don't include melting hotel appliances into modern art. His steak, sizzling sadly on the ironing board, looked like it had been grilled on the surface of a laptop battery. At one point, he even attempted to defend the flavor profile, claiming the iron imparted subtle metallic notes, which is a poetic way of saying ruined. In the end, the hotel manager simply requested he stop reinventing the appliances before someone invents a lawsuit. 8. A customer caught bathing in a public fountain explained they were testing the water pressure for community safety, as if the city had subcontracted hygiene inspection to wandering shirtless philosophers. The fountain, whose job was simply to be pretty and occasionally receive a coin, was now a whirlpool spa for one very optimistic rule breaker. When security approached, they lifted their arms like a triumphant aquatic superhero, declaring that citizens deserved clean, refreshing water and that they were bravely ensuring quality control. This bold declaration might have landed better if they hadn't been wearing a shower cap and humming a spa playlist. Passers-by watched with the kind of fascinated horror usually reserved for wildlife documentaries where the narrator whispers, "Here we observe a creature absolutely thriving in conditions no one asked for." The city later confirmed that fountain inspection does not, in fact, require partial nudity, volunteer testers, or surprise bubble bath additives. 9. A man tried to explain why he'd brought a live turkey onto a commuter train by saying the bird was his emotional accountability partner, a title that would raise questions even if assigned to a therapist, let alone a very confused farm animal. The turkey, who looked seconds away from filing its own complaint, strutted nervously between passengers as everyone debated whether they were on a train or a surreal Renaissance painting. When asked why the turkey needed to be present during rush hour, he solemnly claimed the bird keeps him grounded, which is certainly one way to describe something that occasionally attempts to fly directly into overhead luggage. The conductor, having clearly exhausted all available patience, calmly asked for documentation, which the man provided in the form of a handwritten certificate labeled Gobble Support Unit. It was signed unhelpfully by the turkey's footprint. The turkey, meanwhile, took this moment to demonstrate its therapeutic impact by pecking a coffee cup off someone's lap. 10. Someone once attempted to explain why they had climbed a department store mannequin and were riding it like a budget rodeo champion by saying they were demonstrating unsafe product placement, an argument that instantly aged the store manager 10 years. The mannequin, designed solely to model cardigans in quiet dignity, now stood at a 45-degree angle under the weight of a customer who had clearly mistaken it for a mechanical bull. Shoppers gathered in cautious awe as the rider lectured about the ergonomic hazards of static displays while gripping the mannequin's plastic shoulders like they were about to lasso an imaginary herd. When asked to come down, they claimed they were halfway through a consumer safety audit, though the only safety issue present was the imminent collapse of both rider and mannequin. This wasn't an audit. It was a slow-motion disaster, powered entirely by confidence and an apparent lack of understanding of what mannequins are for. 11. A woman tried to explain why she'd taped dozens of forks to her car's dashboard by insisting it was a prototype for impact-based utensil storage, which is something no engineer, scientist, or mentally stable person has ever requested information about. The The forks glinted ominously like a medieval booby trap designed by someone who hates passengers. When her friend asked if this was safe, she argued that in the event of a collision she'd still have access to cutlery, which raises the concerning possibility that her priorities during emergencies involve pasta. A police officer investigating the situation stared at the spiky interior like he'd stumbled upon a vehicular porcupine and gently suggested she remove them for her own safety. She refused on the grounds that innovation is always misunderstood, a phrase often uttered moments before innovation is confiscated. The only thing being innovated here was new and exciting ways to terrify anyone entering her car. 12. A man once tried to explain why he was throwing bread rolls at a robot vacuum in a shopping mall by insisting he was training it to forage, delivering the sentence with the calm authority of a wildlife expert describing a herd of buffalo. The vacuum, however, was not absorbing this training. Instead, it kept tragically smearing the crushed bread into the tile like an embarrassed pet. When mall staff confronted him, he passionately argued that autonomous machines need real-world survival skills, as though AI would someday evolve into a species requiring carbs for winter. He insisted the vacuum had potential, pointing at its blinking lights as though they were signs of intelligence rather than a polite cry for firmware updates. Meanwhile, shoppers stepped around the battlefield of dough, crumbs, and one enthusiast determined to guide the next generation of housekeeping robots toward feral self-sufficiency. The vacuum eventually shut down, perhaps out of shame, or perhaps because even machines have limits. 13. A teenager tried to explain why they dyed the family dog bright neon blue by saying the animal requested a more expressive aesthetic, which is exactly the kind of logic that should result in someone losing their access to hair dye until adulthood. The dog, radiating the energy of a startled highlighter, wandered the living room looking like a mascot for a discount tech startup. When the parents demanded answers, the teen doubled down, claiming the dog had been feeling overlooked in the household brand identity, as though they were raising a four-legged marketing intern. They added that blue communicates confidence, which, ironically, the dog demonstrated none of, considering it now refused to make eye contact. Even the groomer struggled to maintain composure upon hearing that the makeover was commissioned by the dog itself. Somewhere in all this, the teen pulled out a mood board, which did not help. The only thing being expressed here was a complete breakdown in pet-related decision-making. 14. A man caught sleeping inside a store's display tent offered the explanation that he was evaluating long-term comfort metrics, a phrase that suggests he believed he was conducting a research grant rather than napping in aisle 7. Customers peeked inside to find him sprawled across the air mattress like a weary pioneer at a camping expo. When staff woke him, he insisted he wasn't actually sleeping. He was immersing himself in the user experience, a statement typically reserved for tech demos, not snoring in sporting goods. He defended his actions with surprising professionalism, gesturing at the tent flap and whispering, "The airflow situation needs review," as though he were negotiating a corporate merger. What he did not address was why he'd brought a bag of snacks, a paperback novel, and what appeared to be a portable fan, all of which suggested this was less research and more a fully realized afternoon getaway. 15. Someone once explained why they had thrown an entire pizza onto a stranger's roof by saying the house needed a conversation starter, which is the kind of reasoning that should automatically disqualify someone from being allowed near delivery food. The pizza, adhering to the shingles like a greasy sun visor, slowly slid downward as the homeowner stared in horrified silence. The thrower, meanwhile, proudly justified their rooftop culinary art by claiming that neighborhoods lacked spontaneity and that airborne pizza installations could build community engagement, a phrase no sociologist has ever dared to associate with pepperoni. When the homeowner demanded to know why their house was chosen, the thrower simply shrugged and said its energy felt receptive, which is an impressive way of admitting random vandalism. As the pizza finally detached and flopped onto the driveway in a sad, cheese-heavy thud, everyone silently agreed that not all community projects are created equal, and some should never leave the brainstorming phase. 16. A man tried to explain why he'd installed a motion-activated confetti cannon above his front door by claiming it was a security system, which is an interesting interpretation considering burglars are typically discouraged by alarms, not celebratory glitter explosions. Neighbors reported hearing random bursts of party sounds in the middle of the night, followed by the man shouting, "Good! They know I'm prepared!" as if criminals were out there thinking, "Ah yes, we must avoid the house of the glitter warlord." When police asked why the cannon nearly concussed a mail carrier that morning, he insisted it was calibrating itself emotionally, a phrase no machine has ever required. Meanwhile, the cannon sat above the door like a festive landmine waiting for its next victim. The officer suggested he remove the device. The man countered with, "But what if the next intruder hates joy?" Proving once again that some people don't deserve access to hardware stores or creativity. 17. A woman once tried to explain why she was walking through a shopping mall with a lawn flamingo leashed like a small dog by saying she was normalizing alternative pet relationships, which is remarkable because the flamingo was made of plastic, her leash was a jump rope, and every passerby had that glazed expression people get when they're trying very hard not to make eye contact with an unfolding social experiment. She insisted the flamingo responds best to structured outings, as though the creature had a rigorous emotional development plan. When mall security gently asked her to remove the object, she pointed out that other customers were carrying shopping bags and that her flamingo was simply carrying its truth. The flamingo, to its credit, remained perfectly silent, which made it the most reasonable participant in the situation. Eventually, she marched it proudly out of the mall, lecturing everyone about respecting diversity in pet ownership. The flamingo continued being plastic, unfazed by the entire ordeal. 18. A teenager tried explaining why their family's greenhouse was now full of smoke by saying they were training the plants for adversity, which is a sentence that immediately disqualifies someone from being trusted around both fire and botany. They'd lit incense sticks, 20 of them, because apparently the tomatoes needed emotional ambiance and the basil needed to explore its inner narrative. When the parents asked why the smoke alarm was screaming like a terrified opera singer, the teen calmly responded that growth requires challenge, a philosophy that plants have never endorsed. The fire department arrived to find a fog so thick it looked like the greenhouse had joined a rock band and was preparing for its debut concert. The firefighters struggled to maintain professionalism, while the teen continued describing the smoke as botanical enrichment. Meanwhile, the plants themselves drooped in what could only be interpreted as collective disappointment. Adversity achieved, enlightenment not so much. 19. A man tried to explain why he brought a megaphone to his dentist appointment by claiming he needed to amplify his concerns, a choice that caused every hygienist within a 4-room radius to reconsider their career. As soon as the dentist asked how he'd been feeling, he blasted, "Numbness persists," at a volume usually reserved for political rallies and cruise ship evacuations. When the staff begged him to turn off the device, he insisted that medical honesty required clarity and projection, apparently believing dental professionals struggle with hearing unless addressed like a crowd at a county fair. At one point, he attempted to give commentary on his own x-rays through the megaphone, confusing both himself and the equipment. When asked why he couldn't simply speak normally, he blamed poor acoustics, despite being in a room designed specifically to prevent echoes. The megaphone was eventually confiscated, leaving him to whisper complaints with theatrical sadness, as though oppressed by a tyrannical regime of reasonable volume. 20. Someone attempted to explain why they built a fort out of office chairs during a team meeting by claiming the chairs were forming an energy barricade, which is the corporate equivalent of announcing you've entered your wizard era. Their co-workers sat frozen as this person stacked chairs around themselves like a medieval siege defense designed by a bored intern with too much caffeine. When asked to rejoin the meeting, they responded from inside the fortress, saying they needed protection from negative workflow. The boss, torn between firing them and documenting this for future HR case studies, asked how they planned to exit the structure. They replied that they'd wait for the chairs to release them, implying the furniture had agency. A safety officer was eventually summoned, likely for both structural and psychological reasons. Meanwhile, the employee remained within their chair citadel, convinced they had successfully reinvented boundaries. The office learned a valuable lesson. Open floor plans are not for everyone. 21. A man tried to explain why he was using a leaf blower inside a supermarket by saying he was redistributing the air economy, which is one of those explanations that makes every listener slightly dumber. Employees watched in horror as produce stickers, receipts, and onions rolled across the floor in a miniature indoor hurricane. When security demanded an explanation, he elaborated that the airflow inside grocery stores was stagnant and that he was performing a civic duty by reinvigorating circulation, as if aerodynamics were a communal resource and not something that should remain outdoors where gravity and common sense coexist. Shoppers clung to their carts like survivors of a mild natural disaster, while he confidently directed the blower toward shelves, proudly proclaiming, "The bananas appreciate this." The bananas remained as silent as the yogurt he'd accidentally launched into a sale bin. Eventually, the power was cut, leaving him standing in a calm aisle he immediately accused of air hoarding. 22. A woman tried explaining why her drone was hovering outside her own second-story window by saying it was monitoring her productivity, a phrase that should never accompany consumer technology or personal sanity. Neighbors watched the drone bob gently like a judgmental mechanical hummingbird while she typed on her laptop, periodically glancing at it as though awaiting performance feedback. When someone asked why she didn't simply set a timer or use a productivity app, she insisted, "Timers lack authority," and that only a hovering robot provided adequate psychological pressure. At one point, the drone dipped unexpectedly, and she snapped at it, telling the machine to maintain professional boundaries, as though it wasn't responding to battery drain but to emotional fatigue. When the drone finally crashed into her flower box, she scolded it for being dramatic. The neighbors, unsure whether to call tech support or a wellness hotline, opted to retreat indoors, leaving her to reboot her airborne supervisor. 23. A man caught holding a séance in the middle of a laundromat explained he was summoning the spirit of missing socks, which is arguably the most understandable attempt at paranormal communication, yet still wildly inappropriate for a Tuesday afternoon. He sat between dryers with candles arranged in a circle, chanting at the lint trap like it contained ancient wisdom. Customers trying to fold towels had to sidestep his mystical proceedings while he lectured them about the sock dimension, claiming he was close to breaching the veil. A woman asked him to move his candle off her dryer. He replied, "The spirits are working," which is not an answer recognized by any customer service policy. When an employee pointed out that open flames weren't allowed, he insisted the sock spirits required warmth, apparently unaware that dryers already exist. The séance ended only when a candle melted onto his shoe, at which point he declared the ritual successful enough and left, single sock still missing. 24. A teenager tried explaining why their bicycle was stuck at the top of a tree by claiming it was escaping unrealistic expectations, which says a lot about the teen, but even more about the tree's willingness to participate. The bike dangled from a branch like it had attempted flight and learned an important lesson about gravity. When the parent demanded an explanation grounded in physics, the teen insisted the bike felt pressured to perform and needed a safe vertical environment. Neighbors gathered, offering interpretations ranging from prank gone wrong to performance art, while the teen continued defending the bike's emotional autonomy. A ladder was eventually fetched, though not without the teen warning that forcing the bike down might invalidate its journey. The parent removed the bike anyway, discovering the front wheel bent at a 90-degree angle like a visual metaphor for adolescent logic. The bike remained silent, clearly exhausted from its brief career as a tree ornament. 25. A man explained why he'd released a dozen helium balloons inside a bank lobby by claiming the space needed uplift, a pun so aggressively intentional it could qualify as a federal offense. As the balloons drifted toward the ceiling like a cheerful economic forecast gone rogue, tellers stared with the blank expression of people whose job descriptions do not include altitude management. The man proudly gestured at his airborne decorations, insisting they would improve morale, though most customers looked more confused than uplifted. When management asked him to remove the balloons, he argued gravity was responsible for their current position and that he had no control over natural forces, which is technically true but not helpful. Eventually, a very tall employee retrieved the balloons using a broom, all while the man lectured everyone on the importance of positive financial energy. The balloons were escorted out, leaving the lobby slightly less chaotic but equally bewildered. 26. A woman tried explaining why she had covered her entire porch in bubble wrap by saying she was mitigating atmospheric stress, a concept surely not endorsed by meteorologists. Passers-by watched as she tiptoed across her crackling porch like a soldier navigating a field of Rice Krispies. When asked if she was worried about noise, she insisted the popping sounds released negativity, an interesting stance considering the neighborhood's negativity increased with every loud snap. Delivery drivers dreaded approaching her house, knowing each step turned them into unwitting participants in a cacophonous therapy session. She lectured one driver about the importance of personal cushioning, despite his clear desire to escape the bubble-covered blast zone. Eventually, the wrap began peeling off in the rain, clinging to her door like a desperate, soggy octopus. She simply declared it weather feedback and began planning version 2. The neighborhood collectively prayed for silence. 27. A man attempted to explain why he was feeding a vending machine slices of cheese by insisting it needed calcium, a theory unsupported by science, nutrition, or logic. The machine, utterly unappreciative of this dairy-forward generosity, kept rejecting the slices, which slid sadly down the retrieval slot like lactose-based letters returned to sender. When bystanders pointed out that vending machines consume electricity, not cheddar, he argued they deserve dietary variety, as though machines suffer from nutritional boredom. He then tried folding the cheese into little envelopes, claiming the machine might accept better presentation. The machine disagreed, loudly, making that aggressive mechanical growl it reserves for money jams and human foolishness. Eventually, an employee intervened, removing both the man and the cheese before the machine declared itself clinically dairy intolerant. The man left, insisting the machine would miss him, but the machine remained stoic, its glowing keypad silently begging for competent users. 28. Someone tried explaining why they were jogging through a cemetery wearing ankle bells by claiming they were respectfully alerting the spirits, a sentence that made a groundskeeper audibly sigh. The bells jingled with every step, turning their workout into a cross between holiday caroling and medieval plague heralding. When asked whether the spirits required audible notifications, they insisted it prevented misunderstandings, as though ghosts regularly confuse joggers for trespassers. A family visiting a gravesite paused to watch this acoustically enhanced athlete dance between tombstones like a festive wind chime caught in a cardio routine. The groundskeeper suggested they run elsewhere. They countered that the cemetery had optimal spiritual airflow, a concept thankfully not recognized by fitness professionals. In the end, they jogged away, bells jingling defiantly, leaving behind a chorus of confused visitors and one very tired spirit who probably wished headphones existed in the afterlife. 29. A man tried explaining why he'd attempted to walk through a revolving door backwards by claiming he was reversing life's momentum, which is a poetic way of saying he caused a minor hostage situation involving himself, 2 strangers, and 4 panels of unforgiving glass. The door jammed instantly, trapping everyone in a slow-motion merry-go-round of mutual despair. When security asked why he couldn't simply use the door the normal way, he insisted that backward entry refreshes perspective, though the only perspective being refreshed was everyone's appreciation for functional architecture. A maintenance worker eventually had to disassemble part of the mechanism while the man continued offering philosophical commentary about embracing unconventional paths, ignoring the fact that conventional paths don't typically require rescue. Once freed, the other trapped individuals fled without hesitation, leaving him to declare the experience liberating. The revolving door, now technically a stationary door, suffered in dignified silence. And there it is, a full parade of human nonsense, and we barely hit the shallow end. Drop your favorite disaster in the comments and stick around. The madness only gets louder.